Right, so Keir Starmer has been overseeing a hierarchy of racism in his Labour Party. This is not really a secret any longer. It has become demonstrable fact because there's been a pattern to it, for one. From the authorisation of the Forde Report into Labour bullying and racism, to Starmer delaying the release of the findings of that report, presumably because he didn't like them, to ignoring the recommendations of that report, to blanking the author, Martin Forde himself, and even banning Labour MPs from speaking to him. And then, of course, we have the disproportionate treatment of black and ethnic minority figures within the parliamentary Labour Party itself that can be pointed to, notably in recent news that has involved Diane Abbott, but she's far from alone in that. Yet Starmer has managed to shield himself, for the most part, from accusations of racism because of the support he has had from others, for example Doreen Lawrence, mother of murdered teen Stephen Lawrence, who has become Labour's race advisor under Starmer. So broadly speaking, for as long as Starmer is enjoying her support, accusations of being racist or presiding over a racist party can be deflected. However, Lawrence, despite her ongoing public support for Starmer, has now been caught having said that Starmer doesn't actually listen to her. So with so much to point to by way of a race problem in Starmer's administration, exactly why does Doreen Lawrence still support him, even after this latest example of Starmer's hierarchy of racism has now come out?
I want you just to very quickly set the scene for me. Why were you invited to chair a panel? And what were the specific things that you were looking at?
I was invited to chair a panel as an independent lawyer along with 3 Labour Party peers because a number of WhatsApp messages had inadvertently been dumped on the Labour Party server, which revealed some disturbing attitudes to, among other things, anti-Semitism. And the product of the WhatsApp messages, among other things, had formed a leaked report which ran to some 860 pages, which was put on the World Wide Web. And I think my primary task was to try and find out who had leaked the report, because it was leaked very shortly after Keir Starmer was appointed leader of the opposition. And it was thought to have been leaked by those who supported Jeremy Corbyn to undermine the position and to demonstrate that the anti-Semitism which was complained about within the party under Jeremy Corbyn was not as significant as the right-wing press and the right of the party were suggesting. And of course, those on the right of the party were saying it was not being dealt with efficiently, and that was because there was anti-Semitism on the left. And what we found, in essence, was a disciplinary system that just wasn't fit for purpose. Huge backlogs. Seemed to be more fast-tracking of complaints in relation to anti-Semitism and misogyny than anti-black or anti-Muslim racism or other protected characteristics. We called for submissions from Labour Party members. We got 1,100. And they didn't just touch on anti-Semitism, but what they revealed, and I thought it was important that the party knew this, as did the peers. I have to emphasise, we agonised over every line of this report and we reached a consensus. There was a disturbing amount of complaints of racism other than anti-Semitism within the party, and misogyny. And in the report, allegation 6 actually deals and picks up quotes from party members who feel they were subjected to ill-informed, hurtful comments or actions.
Right, so that was Martin Forde KC, author of the Forde Report into Labour Abuses and Racism. That was commissioned by Keir Starmer following the leaking of WhatsApp messages, the findings of another report, essentially, that Starmer's Labour didn't want publishing because, presumably, of what it contained. It turned out to be a litany of abuse, misogyny and hate speech, some racial, some derogatory towards protected characteristics. But it got leaked anyway, hence why it is most often referred to as the Labour Leaks Report. This led to the commissioning of the Forde Report, which, as Martin Forde stated there, part of the remit was to find out who leaked it. And in fact, as time has gone on, that's really been the only bit Starmer has ever been concerned with, having taken several Labour staffers under Corbyn to court accusing them of leaking it, to no avail, and wasting tens of thousands of pounds of party members' dues in doing so. And to this day, we still do not know who actually leaked that report. But to be honest, it's not the point either, because of the other findings of the Forde Report. We know that there was this hierarchy of racism happening. So why isn't Starmer paying nearly as much attention to that? Why has that been an ongoing issue? It is from this Forde Report that the phrase hierarchy of racism came into public discourse, because public usage it came into, because where anti-Semitism was prioritised as something that Labour were going to deal with under Starmer, every other form of racism and attack on protected characteristics ended up being considered secondary. And so it became a literal hierarchy of racism. Some forms of racism, or one in particular, became more important than others. Until recently, you only needed to visit the Labour Party complaints page to see that enforced, because where anti-Semitism had a bespoke complaints option to expedite those complaints, no other form of racism or protection got that same treatment. Finally, that appears to have been addressed on the website, I have noticed. But whether those complaints of other forms of racism or discrimination get dealt with any faster is another matter. We see the hierarchy of racism and witness it still, even amongst Starmer's black and ethnic minority MPs too. This is more the public face of it that more of us are noticing, as this recent graphic has done the rounds recently on social media, comprising a mix of Labour MPs who have either been sacked, suspended, triggered to be replaced as MPs, or have resigned under Starmer's leadership from the front bench for reasons ranging from Labour's position on Gaza to attitudes towards mental health. But the standout example of all those MPs shown there is, of course, Diane Abbott, arguably the most recognisable MP there, who I have covered in recent videos, and so I'm not going to go over too much of that again here. But in connection here between Abbott and Doreen Lawrence, who I'm going to come on to shortly, comes news of Labour's planned Race Equality Act, which should, in theory, shut up people like me pointing out Labour's hierarchy of racism, that they aren't dealing with it. But if it were everything it's cracked up to be, it wouldn't be getting criticism like it is. And that's not coming from me, that's coming from Black Party activists and campaigners. And this is something that Doreen Lawrence has said she has been proud to have worked on. When Labour's Race Equality Act was unveiled last month, there was hell up. This is what Afro-Caribbean newspaper The Voice said of it in its coverage. The Labour Party's secretive unveiling of its Race Equality Act proposals has fuelled frustration and anger amongst Black Party activists and equality campaigners. The party had originally planned to release its plans yesterday afternoon in North London, but cancelled the event at short notice, citing undisclosed security concerns. A hastily organised event launch did eventually take place in South London. However, Black MPs, community media and leading campaign groups were not invited, leading to accusations from party members we spoke to that the Labour Party intentionally excluded them in a bid to censor opportunities to grill party leader Keir Starmer and Equality Secretary Annalise Dodds, preventing any real scrutiny of the Race Equality Act plans, which were launched back in 2020. When The Voice asked the party's media team about the location and time of the launch event, it was told that the nature of today's event has now changed and we won't be able to have journalists in attendance. Sources within the party also told The Voice that a number of Black MPs had been blindsided about the launch day, while others apparently sought to distance themselves from an event they believed was lacking credibility. Some who spoke to The Voice said they doubt whether plans for a fully fledged Race Equality Act exist beyond bullet points in a circulated press release. Other party sources The Voice spoke to claim that Labour intends to introduce the Act once it enters office. However, after almost 4 years since plans for a new Race Equality Act were first announced, the lack of detail and dialogue around the proposals are increasingly being viewed with scepticism. Speaking to The Voice, veteran MP and campaigner Diane Abbott slammed Labour's lacklustre plan and its launch. The proposed Race Equality Act is just window dressing, she said. The foremost black media organisation, The Voice, was not invited to the launch and most black MPs were excluded. This reveals the reality of where Keir Starmer's Labour Party really stands on fighting anti-black racism. I mean, that is absolutely damning and does scream of Labour hiding away from awkward questions, though frankly I have no doubt such questions will be awaiting Starmer come the general election campaign, and he might find it a little bit more difficult to get away from them then. But now even Doreen Lawrence is voicing her concerns, albeit these are coming from reports of what she said behind closed doors, and publicly she is still expressing support for Starmer, which, given she has accused him of not listening to her, he might not have heard either. Lawrence has complained of not being listened to, that Starmer needs to prioritise visiting diverse communities, churches with black congregations. The fact she is saying these things smacks of Starmer avoiding these bodies, implying he has a problem with visiting them, certainly publicly. And for those aware of the disproportionately unfair treatment of black and ethnic minority MPs and the fact the recommendations of Martin Forde's report have not been enacted, certainly it appears that the Labour leadership have a relationship problem with black voters. Lawrence is quoted as having said, "I was appointed as the race advisor, but I haven't been listened to. I wish Keir listened to me. There are gatekeepers who stop things from happening." Well, who are these gatekeepers then? Who is close to Starmer that is interested in shutting this discussion up? And how much power and sway do they have that Starmer is evidently listening to them? Going by what you've just said. Lawrence hasn't said who these people are, but after her comments were leaked to the press, she came back with, "Of course I'm always going to push the party to do more, as the fight for equality is never done. But I've known Keir for years and I've no doubts about his commitment to equality and fighting racism. That's why I've been proud to work with Labour to develop their plans for a new Race Equality Act." None of this, I think, is going to reassure black and ethnic minority voters that Labour has their interests at heart. I don't think Doreen Lawrence is helping herself with her overt support for Starmer still, when behind closed doors she appears to be saying otherwise, and certainly when so many other BAME Labour MPs and figures are calling Starmer out, doing things such as resigning from his front bench or are on the receiving end of strung-out disciplinary procedures that seem more in line with ensuring they can't stand for Labour again, such as Diane Abbott and Keir Starmer. And as much as I don't believe Starmer becoming Prime Minister is going to be good news for anyone except the rich, I think it's becoming more and more clear that it will be disproportionately worse for those coming from black and ethnic minority backgrounds. He commissioned a report to investigate racism in the Labour Party and he ignored its findings. He appoints Doreen Lawrence to advise on race relations and is ignoring her advice, it would appear. How can this be seen any other way? Meanwhile, Parliament is hardly any better when they can have a debate in Parliament about the abuse Diane Abbott has received, and Starmer's bunch will have the brass neck to attack the Tories over that. All whilst Diane Abbott is there, being talked about, but was never chosen to speak on the matter herself, despite rising 46 times to do so. You can get the details of that sorry mess on this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.